Hello again, and welcome to Mastering Dungeons. I'm Sean Merwin, here with my inevitable co-host, Teos Avadia. Hey, Teos.
It sounds like super whoish. Inevitable.
The inevitable. I've been described as inevitable before, and
really,
I took it as a compliment, although I don't know that it was. Yeah.
I mean, some things you have to take as compliments.
Right, exactly.
Because the only other option is, kind of scary.
I've also been called a raging idiot, which I also took as a compliment.
I think my favorite forum post remains that one about how they wanted to see you run over a bus for one of the adventures that at the time was one of my favorite adventures. So
yeah, well, so far I have escaped all buses, so we'll hope that continues. Living way out in the country, you don't, unless it's a school bus, you don't get a lot of buses. So, and I'm always on the lookout for school buses.
You have to be.
That. Yep. So, with that bit of silliness out of the way, let's talk about the extensive news that we have for the week. The news just kept on coming. And the first bit is that D&D has a new senior producer. Lisa Ohanian announced on Twitter that she is now a senior producer for D&D. You saw the tweet. I didn't. So let us know what she talked about.
It was a super cool tweet. It was sort of like two images side by side, and one of them she shares that her earliest memory with her dad is looking at the pictures in the 2E monster manual, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And then her 12th birthday is a one shot with friends from the Wizards of the Coast store, and then since 2017, she says she's been in at least 3 games at a time. And her resume is primarily on the video game side of things, producing a number of great games at Riot Games. Valorant, God of War, Call of Duty. You might have heard of those. And something I thought was extremely cool is that she has a master's in entertainment industry management from Carnegie Mellon, which is a great school. But I just think it's so cool that master in entertainment industry management, like that was certainly not offered when I was in school.
Yeah, I live probably 2.5 hours from Carnegie Mellon, so I am now strongly considering going back for my master's in entertainment industry management. Yeah, because Lord knows I need it.
We all do. But yeah, congratulations to Lisa. I, think that companies should announce when they hire people. That'd be cool. But at least we have Twitter so that people can tell us themselves.
Yeah, that's cool. And it'll be interesting to see, some of the first thing that she's involved in as a producer.
Yeah, that's the kind of work that I love seeing what people do. There have been producers in the past at D&D that have made a really big mark. So I'm excited for that.
Mm-hmm. And just as we were starting to record, a new D&D survey went live. It is a short survey that covers both Magic the Gathering and D&D. And after I finished taking it, I saw that it was called the Wizards Sentiment Survey. So if you have any sentiments, not sediments, we're not talking about rocks here. We're talking about sentiments, what you feel about these things. And it, as Teos wrote, it does ask you how you feel about Magic the Gathering and D&D, assuming that you've played both. So, and then it has the typical question, what's your favorite deck to play in Magic? What's your favorite race or class to play in D&D?
Yeah, I think a lot of folks will come into it, since it just came out on the D&D Twitter account, thinking like, oh yeah, ask me about D&D, and it's going to be, what color do you prefer to play in your Magic the Gathering deck? And there are also reports, this is one of these surveys that has a lot of exit points. So one of my friends said, I told him my age and the survey was done from 50% to 0. And it's like, uh-oh. I haven't finished it, so I'm curious whether that'll happen to me.
Yeah, after I gave my age, the computer broke, so I don't know if there was a data input error, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a creator or a consumer on the DMs Guild, there is some new print-on-demand guidelines for you to contend with. I'm going to let Teos take this over.
That is a wise choice. I'm going to pass to. Oh wait, it's just me, so I will talk about this. Yeah, so in the past, there's been some criticism about how print on demand worked, which sometimes seemed like it was like you needed to know somebody or something strange had to permeate and work and the stars aligned so that your product was print on demand. Otherwise, it was sort of not possible. So one good thing is that now there are very clear standards. But you may not like those standards, which I think all stem from two things. One is that there's sort of a weird way that the DMs Guild works versus how OBS works, the larger DriveThru side. That's weird. We'll talk about that a bit more. And then two, that I don't think for a lot of products, there aren't huge volumes of printing going on. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be efficient for it to work. So the way they've done this is that there are new product requirements. Your product must be 100 pages or more. It must either already be platinum, which is a small number of products, mm-hmm. or from a creator who has a platinum product. So just the 100-page mark, that's going to separate most of your DMs Guild material out, because only a very few products are 100 pages or more. And then the platinum piece on top of it, that's going to further separate that out to where very few things are being looked at for print on demand. And then the third part, which gets really interesting, you must use an approved layout designers. And they give you 4 approved designers, which I think one of them already disappeared and was replaced by someone. And there are no applications to be an approved layout designer at this time, they say. So somehow the guild just knew that these 4 people can do it. Mm-hmm. And you have to contact those 4 directly. And I guess those people should charge extremely high rates because they're the only 4, and that's how economy usually works. So
yeah, I mean, questions come to mind right away on all of this. I don't even know if it's worth going into, except for the fact that like some platinum products have like 14 or 20 people who contributed design to it. Mm-hmm. Do they count as a platinum creator? All of that can be. Yeah, and it's tough because, as you say, the process has been so strange and changed over the years. At some points, they were begging people to put up print-on-demand stuff, and then it seems like weeks later, if you went to them and say, "May I please do a print-on-demand," they would say no. So
yeah, and then another one would be approved for print-on-demand the next week, and you're like,
exactly,
what was that about?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating for a number of creators that I know who are what I would say established, proven creators, where they've not been able to get blessed. So at least we have the criteria. But, it was interesting. I was looking at the comments on a tweet, and I think the DMs Guild folk were trying to do a decent job of being very open and listening and all of that. But folks were sort of like, wait, I don't get it. DriveThru lets me do all these things. Mm-hmm. On DriveThru, I know what I have to do for layout. I can create the layout, and I may have to pay for iterations of it to make sure it works. But at the end of the day, I can just do it myself, and I can use any number of layout designers. And you're all one company, so what gives? And what came out of it was sort of that I guess because the guild does not allow you to put your print-on-demand files up yourself, a team member from the DMs Guild OBS team has to shepherd these files, which becomes then a costly, lengthy process. And what immediately came to mind for me is, well, so why doesn't it work the way DriveThru works? You're one company. Right. And someone, of course, brought that up, and the answer was, well, we hope to do that eventually. So it's a bit bizarre, but I guess in the end of it, it only impacts but so many creators if these guidelines are going to be in place. But it would be really nice if it just worked like DriveThru. Mm-hmm. And it could be a model that everybody could enjoy.
I wonder if having Wizards, IP involved changes anything. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. It shouldn't, in theory. I mean, in theory, the process of approving your print on demand should not be too expensive or onerous for anybody. It may require a little bit of printing back and forth for the person that's doing the product, but that shouldn't be that expensive. And then it should just be whether people buy it or not, and it should all just work. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we will keep an eye on that and see if it changes again in the coming weeks or months. Hey, how'd you like to play Hero Quest on your phone?
I would love to.
Yeah, I've heard that. Apparently, via the evil Zargon of the Hero Quest Twitter account, in late 2021, we may see an app that will allow you to run the game on your phone. They have videos up displaying heroes, maps, items, everything you might expect. The question that we have is, hey, Teos worked on the one of the expansions from that. Not quite Kickstarter, but project funding. So it'd be great if they would have the expansions up there too.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, the physical rewards haven't come out yet, but I'm curious whether they will add that to the phone version. So I don't know. I'm keeping an eye on that for sure.
In Kickstarter news, we have a new winner in the how much money can we get for an RPG Kickstarter. Magpie Games has decided to crush all competition when they launched their licensed role-playing game for Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's been up, as of this recording, maybe 3 or 4 days at most, and they're already over $4 million. So that pretty much doubles the previous record from MCDM's Strongholds and Followers. Still 20-plus days to go. Probably by now over 35,000 probably backers. I don't have it up in front of me, but we're getting there. So that's a thing.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing to break that Strongholds and Followers mark in just a few days. And Avatar is huge, but I guess I didn't realize it was this huge. It's a wonderful show, and if you're a listener and you haven't seen it, you should watch it. It's great. It's full of neat ideas, and I can see how it's beloved to a lot of people. But I did not expect this. I also didn't expect that it would be from Magpie Games, which is a small, innovative RPG company, right, with this diverse staff. The game that I've purchased of theirs is Pasión de las Pasiones, which was a Kickstarter, very small, modest Kickstarter that I haven't yet to receive. It's still being made. It's just shocking to see that this has gone to this level.
Yeah, it is odd. What I've theorized, and this proves my theory wrong, is that sort of the really large brands, the really large IPs, often have a hard time selling games associated with it. We've had some great Star Trek games, we've had some great Star Wars games, but they haven't really gone and toppled D&D or even come close. Yeah, or even come close to toppling some lesser IP related role playing games. And so I'm not shocked that it's doing this well. But that blows my theory out of the water.
Well, I think the question is whether you can sustain it, because a lot of fans can put money down for the promise of something. And the actuality of something is a little harder, right? I think a lot of us probably own a Star Wars RPG book. Do we play it all the time? No. Right? Is the reality for most gamers out there.
Right.
And so despite being an enormous property that's much loved, it just doesn't have tons and tons of play. Right. And that'll be the question, whether a game like this can break out of that mold and create the community that is necessary to drive the game and, to where people want more products, the whole engine keeps going. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, anyway, congratulations to Magpie Games for A, getting the license, and then B, absolutely going wild with this Kickstarter. Hey, this is of note to you specifically, Teos. I see. Latin American Monsters free Kickstarter preview. So Legendary Games is launching this Kickstarter on August 17th for 5e Latin American themed monsters. Legendary Games, if you remember back maybe a year ago, had to pull a Kickstarter for the Far East role-playing game when it was perceived to be in pretty poor taste and attempting to profit from the culture of others. The company is back saying that they have learned from their previous attempt, and they have nearly 20 Latin American authors, artists, and cultural consultants involved in the project.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I took a look at the free 11-page preview that you can get through DriveThru in preparation for their Kickstarter of the 17th. The number of countries that are involved in terms of folklore: Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, it just goes on. So all kinds of countries in Central and South America. And they're apparently going to have a Pathfinder version as well. So check out the 11-page preview. I thought it was pretty neat looking, and I'm looking forward to this coming out just for obvious reasons for me. But yeah, I'm excited. One thing I did notice is the preview did not tell me what countries are sort of most closely associated with the monsters that they showed. And I hope they add that, because that's always a neat part for me, because I don't know all the legends of all these different countries, and having a country name associated would be great.
Cool. Well, from Latin America to the Underdark, WizKids thinks that you need a full-sized Drizzt statue.
I mean, you do, obviously, right? We all do. This is the hole in our heart that we were wondering what it was. You thought it was the bad response to COVID as a species? No. It was your need for a full-size Drizzt statue.
So WizKids is offering a 5-foot 7-inch foam statue of the Drow Ranger wielding his 2 swords. And Teo says they don't really look like scimitars, but at least they're different blades. Cannon. Needs it. Has a removable hood and cloak. And, if you want more than one, they're available at the low price of $1,500.
So you can have flanking, Drizzt.
Exactly. I'm just shy of 5'7", and I would sell myself for $1,500. So it's cheap. It's cheap at twice the price, really.
I mean, this is the gift that keeps on giving. You're never going to regret having spent $1,500 for a 5'7". This is so absurd. We've reached peak WizKids. It's clear. I mean, I hope, because I don't know what could come to top this. $1,500.
Yeah, I mean, I was literally wrestling with my conscience on buying, a deck of Magic cards the other day, because do I really need these? Am I really going to use them? Do I want to spend these, $30 or whatever on this box? And then this came up, and I'm like, okay, I am speechless.
Yeah, it is something. On the mundane news side, there are also 2 new sets of figures coming out for Critical Role that are all about NPCs. One of the NPCs is clearly Matt Mercer. And then there are 2 premium figures of a rock and a dragon turtle. And I'm curious how these all do, because there are some number of collectors that just want to have like the minis that are, characters they know from the Critical Role show, but they may not be super applicable like their previous monster sets. You couldn't easily use them as stand-in minis, and they didn't necessarily work for me as evocative minis to just ad lib around. So I'm curious how well all these sets will do, but I mean, people do like their Critical Role, so I'm sure they'll do okay.
I'm sure they would do just fine. And hey, you can have Drizzt fight a dragon turtle, apparently.
Sweet.
Yep. Now, what we need is a life-size dragon turtle. Then, now you're talking. I could ride that bad boy to work. I will put on my GhostFire Gaming hat and say, hey, Greg Marks, welcome to GhostFire Gaming blogs. We've added Greg for some thought-provoking and useful blogs. The first, his series is going to be on story building. And in the first one that Greg wrote, he talks about how to design rules for gear that are still story focused. Since Grim Hollow is a sort of dark fantasy setting, we're really trying to highlight not quite low magic, but you really need to work at overcoming obstacles, and just grabbing a magic item to save your life isn't something that's likely to happen. So Greg digs in with this idea of how in movies you see gear being a highlight of grim or dark settings, like improvised weapons. You have to grab the leg of the chair and shave it down to turn it into the stake to shoot it with your crossbow at the bad guy. So, those sorts of things are a staple in the Grim Hollow setting, and Greg does an absolutely magnificent job of creating some items that are fun and useful, but not as powerful as a magic item.
Yeah, that was a great blog. I enjoyed reading it. And I like the discussion of properties that weapons could have, like that they're blinding, so they can blind you, or they're fragile, so they will shatter after some amount of time. And then he had some interesting kind of mundane equipment, things like quiet shoes to help you sneak, or a skull cap that protects you once from a critical hit, and then the skull cap is wrecked. I thought that was pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. Also known as a bucket.
Well, this brings me back. The reading this brought me back to two different memories. One was how important it would be to have like a helmet in early play, early editions of D&D, because something like green slime would hit you, and if you didn't have a head protection, a helmet, some kind of thing, you would immediately be taking damage, which was really bad with things like green slime. So you could just tear away your helmet, and your DM would have to begrudgingly agree that, okay, you're all right for now. And then the other thing I thought of was the classic end of the A series of adventures where you are captured and you have no weapons. Mm-hmm. And the various encounters as you go through this Underdark cave complex provide you with little slivers of weapons, a bone that you can sharpen or whatever. And you're like, and you're so excited. Oh, I've got some kind of weapon like thing. And it's really fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So good on you, Greg. Thanks for this great initial blog post, and we're looking forward to more. Speaking of blogs, the IDDM takes us to school on Strixhaven. The IDDM discusses several session 0 opportunities for your upcoming Strixhaven games, including things like freshman orientation, detention like in the Breakfast Club, and a ton more.
Yeah, some really neat ideas here, written with a lot of love. So I enjoyed looking at the IDDM, who's been blogging for ages.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing these ideas. He's clearly very excited about Strixhaven, which I know a lot of my friends are too. So it's a very useful blog. Check it out.
Awesome. And if you're into celebrities playing D&D, we've got another opportunity for you to see the likes of Nathan Fillion, Michael Rooker, and Flula Borg from the Suicide Squad, playing a trio of goblins in a reverse Lost Mines of Phandelver adventure where the goblins are attacking the caravan. The DM, Riley Silverman, does an amazing job of herding the cast through a very entertaining experience. And that's at thenerdist.com.
I was fortunate to be on a D&D Beyond stream with Riley, and I'm like, okay, Riley's cool. And then I'm like, oh, I didn't realize Riley was that cool. You're now the DM for this group. And they are all really funny. Nathan Fillion is surprisingly reasonable. Michael Rooker and Flula Borg are surprisingly not. Right off the bat, Flula hears rogue and says robe, and basically becomes a robe. Like that, his goblin is a robe, just, like bathrobe. And there's a lot that goes into this discussion of the bathrobe, and it's all very funny. And they, Riley has to do their best to manage all of this situation. It's really quite fun to watch. It's a short sequence, but highly entertaining. I was surprised at how good this was.
There you go. In convention news, we're seeing conventions tighten up their COVID requirements. So if you are planning to attend any of these summer, fall, or even winter conventions, something to keep an eye on. Gen Con is now requiring masks at all indoor or crowded outdoor spaces. And they've removed the idea of the wristband that lets you not wear a mask. And they may even go as far as requiring vaccination. Origins has held its line and has become pretty defensive online about their choice of restrictions.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see, because a lot of these states are seeing soaring rates, unfortunately, as the Delta variant just tears through everything. My in-laws just got COVID despite being vaccinated and had a pretty rough time of it, though they now seem to be turning the corner. So it's rough to see these large conventions towing the line. And maybe some of the wording in what Gen Con said almost made me think that they feel like they legally can't require vaccination, something like, I don't know what the basis for that is. I don't understand those delineations, but there may be some of that to it. But it's tough in this industry when you want to celebrate people getting together and you want to celebrate these conventions. I'm a big fan of Origins. I'm a big fan of Gen Con, but there's this human aspect, and you wonder, well, how many people would have to die for these events to go off?
Yeah.
I'm not really happy with any number greater than none. So
Right, exactly. And I mean, we would joke 2 years ago and before about all the people that got sick after attending a convention, and some people, pretty seriously ill with even just flus and so on. And so you take something that's X times more deadly and vicious than that, and it's a serious problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. I am happy that, you and I currently are slated to appear at GameHole Con, and that requires vaccinations, which is why we're on board with it. Yep. But, even then we've got to stay looking at these situations and see, because the Delta variant is, I read a report today, maybe one of the most contagious vaccines ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still, and it's
or vaccines, viruses,
right? And it's still,
that's what they call them.
And we're still learning, exactly how deadly and how transmutable it is. So we'll see. But if GameHole Con ends up happening, hopefully we will see you there, because we are running events and panels and so on. We will have a Mastering Dungeons live recording and panel on Thursday.
Ooh, people get to see the sausage get made.
That's right. This beautiful, beautiful sausage that we have. Teos and I are also doing a panel on Saturday with this gentleman named Mike Merles. Can't quite remember how to pronounce that. Mike Merles. We will be talking about the fine art of the micro dungeon. And we are
both
also
agreed that Mike will do all the work.
Oh, we're gonna. Yeah, I mean, you're not gonna say, "Excuse me, Mike. Could you quiet down for a moment while I impart my knowledge of D&D?" That's not something that I see happening too often.
That's a good point.
And we're also going to be in a game together, a D&D live stream for Extra Life, along with Bill Benham, Elisa Faden, Alan Patrick, all DM'd by the.
Wait! Did you say Alan Patrick?
I did say Alan Patrick.
Oh, that's good news.
Yes. Alan and I will be in the same place at the same time.
It's pretty cool. Your daughter's going to want a picture of that.
I know. And all of this will be DM'd by the inevitable Claire Hoffman, who I love as a DM. So that's
one of my favorite people.
On Friday. Now, you're doing some things without me, I hear.
I mean, you're invited. I'm doing a not D&D. I'm doing a live Aliens stream. Which is really excited. I've played the game once, so I need to brush up on my alien skills. But what I do know is that someone's going to murder somebody repeatedly. The players, myself, Banana Chan, Matt Forbeck, who I've played with before, Tony Winslow Brill, very cool. And the DM is Andrew Gasco, who worked on Aliens. So that's super cool. Then I'm going to run the Clockwork Tower, the adventure that I wrote with my son, that someday will get crowdsourced if I ever get through layout. So that's going to happen. Be very exciting. And we've been talking to some other people about a possible panel. And what else are you doing?
I am running 2 writing workshops. Nice. I believe on Thursday morning and Saturday morning. So it'll be a 3-hour workshop where the people who take part will submit some sort of writing, whether it be a game, game design, adventure design, something like that. I will look at it. We will distribute it to the other people in the workshop, and then we will discuss it. So, hopefully I will learn something. The people who are attending will learn something. And I'm always looking for new writers for projects, so that this is one way in which I can pretend to be teaching while really, for my own benefit, getting some capable writers.
Well, that means that it can be to the benefit of those writers. So sign up for those sessions.
There you go. And with the news safely tucked away, we can now talk about our main topic for today and for probably a few weeks, which is going to be running and designing introductory adventures for D&D. So Teos and I are players, we're DMs, and we're designers of not just D&D, but of other role-playing games and other tabletop games even. Now, we recognize that having a dedicated, passionate fan base is important to the hobby and to the success of the industry. We need those players that have been playing for 30 years to continue to be evangelists for the hobby. Mm-hmm. But if anything, but specifically a game like D&D is going to maintain that health and success, new players must constantly be coming into the game. and new DMs need to hurl themselves up onto the shore of the game and take those steps to run games. So creators of these games, whether they be small creators like Teos and I or large creators like the publishers of games, need to provide some on-ramps into the game. Actual play streams, podcasts, all of those things are great for showcasing the game. Watching games is a wonderful pastime, but some care must be taken as we help new DMs and players get acclimated to actually sitting at the table, rolling dice, and telling stories.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me when I think back across many years of my playing, where I've often tried out new RPGs or gone to conventions to have a one-shot game for a system I didn't know. And sometimes that goes great, and sometimes it's really quite bad. Like, I may have a good time, but when I assess it, when I turn on my designer, my product producer, line manager type of brain, and I think of that experience, I think this was pretty awful. Like, this did not hit, even if people had fun at the table, this did not meet the goals of what you would want for an introductory experience, right? Mm-hmm. And we even see that with the D&D adventures, and we're going to talk about this more, but, what is a perfect introductory D&D adventure? If an adventure is being given away to a new crowd, mm-hmm. Why is it good or bad? Like, that's a fascinating thing to dig into, and so we'll build the basis for that, I think, in this series.
Yep. So we're going to cover a lot of different things in this series that we put together, but we need to probably start at the beginning. So we want to take an episode or 4 to talk about those people who are taking those first steps as a DM. So we'll discuss things to keep in mind as you prepare to DM your first session, what you should do in your first session. And then we'll work our way up to the point of discussing those introductory adventures that people might use, or creating your own introductory adventures to make you your best game mastering self.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about things you should do when you decide to become a DM. This is all going to be done under the auspices of you running a home game. We're not going to talk about conventions or like Adventurers League or Organized Play or anything like that. We're going to keep it, within the confines of you DMing at someone's home, your own or someone else's with a small group. So before your first session, the most important thing to know is you can do this. No DM is great at everything. I don't care who you are.
Right.
And DMing draws upon skills that many people already have. If you're a teacher and you've not perfected, but, if you've become strong as a teacher, you have most of the skills that you need to be a DM, because you're good at managing multiple tasks at the same time, dealing with multiple people at the same time. You're most of the way there.
I would even say that if you're a teacher, or if you're somebody who, let's say, at work gives presentations or anything like that, you're way ahead of the game even. Mm-hmm. Because one of the lovely things about being a DM is that you are the precious commodity. Mm-hmm. And you see this all over the place where people are just like, I just need a warm body to sit in that chair and run this game for me, and I'm going to be happy. It's a low bar to start at. Yeah. And so you almost can't lose. Any losing will probably be in your head through your own self-worry, really is the reality. Sure. And when we're trying to build good experiences, really everything about it should be to lift up that DM so that there's a greater and greater success chance. And similarly, if you're the DM that we're talking about, then you want to do things to increase your likelihood of feeling good about it. But it is important to start, and I agree with you. The number one thing is you should be confident, because people want you and need you. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be forgiving of you. They're not expecting perfection at a typical home game. Right. So you have a lot of room to work with.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty damn fun. I know lots and lots and lots of times I've talked to people about DMing, especially when they're DMing early in their DMing career, and they'll run a 3 or 4 hour game. And then they won't be able to sleep for 3 hours because they're just so excited about all of this. That sort of rush is real. It's a really entertaining, fun, creative. It's cool to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful to see DMs take off. Like I've had DMs, players at tables and organized play programs at a store that were like, could we DM? And it's like, yes, you can. And then you would just watch them take off, and years later they're DMing and having a blast because it's so much fun once you get into it.
Yep. So before your first session, the one thing that you want to do once you decide to do it and realize that it's going to be awesome is to get out of your mind by working on it all of the logistics that have nothing to do with the actual game itself. So where are you going to play? Are there going to be distractions at this place? If so, how can you minimize those distractions? Something as simple as, are you going to have dinner during the game, before the game, after the game? Are you going to have snacks? If you play on a Friday night after work and everyone's coming from work to the game, food becomes an important issue.
Yeah, true.
So do everything that you can to take care of those issues ahead of time. Let people know, hey, if it's at your home, say, hey, we're going to order pizza, or we're going to, do this for our food, or everybody bring a certain thing. We'll eat beforehand, get that all out of the way, and then we can move forward. If you use internet-based tools, will there be internet available?
Right.
There's a location that we sometimes play around here where there is no Wi-Fi, and coverage is very spotty at best. So, people might want to bring a printed version of their character rather than using D&D Beyond, or you're going to want your adventure, in a hard form rather than on the internet.
This is something I learned when I was doing, sort of social gathering parties, not for gaming or anything, but just that do these things, set up these logistics, make your choices, and then don't worry about them. Because you're going to have fun no matter what. And then at the end of the session, you can say, hey, what should I do differently next time? But just like the point of this step is to get those things down so you're not going to worry about them. If you continue to worry about them, you'll undo the benefit of this, right? The best thing is make these decisions and then don't worry about whether you chose the perfect snacks. There's no such thing. It doesn't matter. You've chosen snacks. You're done. Like, forget that. Move on to the game. Right?
Yep. And if you're the DM, but you have a player who revels in such planning, let them do it. And as long as it's applicable to you and it's fine for you, let them take care of that, and then you don't need to worry about it anymore. Let the players know what they need to bring. If they have dice, do they need to bring dice or not? If they have, do they need pencils, pens, any of those things? And also, more importantly, what not to bring. Say you're running for new players and you're newish to the game, and you are part of a regular board game night, and you decide to do D&D instead. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen is somebody ends up bringing a board game, or just bring something they think is cool, but it takes away from what you're about to do. So just, keep these things in mind, and maybe just say, the only thing you need to bring is blank. I'll have everything else. And that gets across the point that you've got it under control, and you won't get distracted by, the one player who knows D&D brings all 72 of their current books, which intimidates the people who haven't played. All of those things can not ruin a night, but they can distract from what you're trying to do. All right. So those are getting those logistics ahead of time, where you're going to play, when you're going to play, how long the session's going to be. You've got all of those things out of the way. Now you can communicate with your players, not only to tell them what you're going to do, but to find out what their expectations are.
Yeah, and I think a big part of this is there's a lot of opportunity here where you can make the game better by giving players a stake in it. An adventure can be super fun if we just go through and we fight the kobolds and, fine, we all threw dice, we all had a good time. But it's even better if we know more about what the players want out of the experience ahead of time. And that includes things like, do we want to start each session by hanging out and talking about D&D news? So like I often play with a bunch of people who are interested in what the industry is doing. And so we kind of have 15 to 30 minutes of chatter. And then one of us will go, all right, game time. But socially, we kind of need that, right? And it isn't necessarily just around D&D. You might want to talk about each other's jobs or lives or whatever. If the game is for kids, sometimes they need a few minutes to run around and play together and show each other stuff in one kid's room and stuff, and then they come back into the table and you're like, all right, now we begin.
Yeah, it's again not a lot different from teaching, where you have to do certain things, but then you have the rituals that bring everything into focus, so you can continue with what you want to do. So another question they have is, or you might have for the players, is what do they want to get out of the game? Have they been watching a stream that is very high on narrative creation and very low on rules talk? Mm-hmm. And if that's what they're expecting, that's sort of the game that you want to present at first. You can always add rules later, but that's going to be where their mind is set. Or the opposite could be true. If you're playing with a bunch of tactical war gamers who want to see what D&D is as a rule set, that might be what you want to focus on first, and then introduce those narrative elements later.
And an important consideration there is how many people are new versus established. Like you might be a new DM for players that are established. Mm-hmm. That's perfectly fine. But you often have some number of players that know less about the game. And so having that focus to say, okay, you and you are newer. We're going to make sure you're supported. Hit me with your questions, everybody, let's give them space to, figure it all out. And thinking through how to showcase, because the more that a system is new for players, the more that you want to think through how to teach it to them. And this gets into that whole idea of, what a product can do, is that often products forget that many of the players will be new, right? Whatever you might use may not have anything in it that really tells how a new player can do things. And I don't want to depart from this too much, but just there was a time when in 4th edition, Chris Tulak, who headed up Organized Play, wrote up a learn to play scenario and really broke it down as the first thing you're going to do is you're going to do skill checks. And you just talk to them about that part of the character sheet. And then there's going to be this combat, and you're going to talk to them about their first attack roll. And it was almost like sectors of the character sheet were lighting up and being used through the play experience. And that was really eye-opening for me. Like, oh, yeah, that is a lot easier when you're not dealing with the entire character sheet. You're just zoning in on a little piece at a time. And I will now always use that as my technique for when I create experiences for new players, to just highlight those little pieces. All right, now we're making skill checks. See that little rectangle on your sheet? That's where we're focused. Here's how it works. And then they start realizing, oh yeah, it's D20 plus this thing on my sheet, and I'm using a sector of my sheet depending on what kind of thing it is. Oh, great. And it becomes secondhand nature before you know it.
Yep. So as you communicate with players to find out what their expectations are, you can then communicate back to them so that they know, based on what you've heard from them, what they can expect when they start to play. Another thing that you might want to use either before the game or at your first session, or at least talk about, are the safety tools like lines and veils and the X card and so on, so that they are aware that these things are in play and that they can feel safe coming to your game, and that they will have some sort of control over the content, the narrative, and so on.
Yeah, and it's easy to want to think of situations where you don't need this. Like, oh, I know the players, or the adventure doesn't really have any problematic content. But the reality is it's always good to bring these up because it will just establish in everyone's mind a pattern, an understanding of proper behavior, and that there is recourse for it versus having to put up with it. And the same thing goes for sort of social contracts. So establishing that you as DM can say, hey, we're going to talk about some aspect of the game that I'm not super loving, and that the players can do that as well. So that can be something like maybe someone's always talking over someone else.
Right.
And this is just something that happens, a social thing. And the person may not notice they're doing it, but to just talk out loud about the fact that this is something we can all address, these kinds of things, wakes everybody up to that understanding. And then if an issue comes up later, it's going to be much easier to bring it up because you've had that foundation.
Right. Just to reinforce what Teos said, it doesn't have to be content warnings. It doesn't have to be triggering words. It doesn't have to be those things specifically. It could be someone is playing a game on their phone and they've got the volume up and they don't even notice. Right. That can be something where you need to stop the game. And if you let people know ahead of time that it's okay to stop the game to adjust these things, then it's less abrupt and sort of less conflict oriented when it does happen.
Yeah, and it just establishes we're all here as a group to have a fun experience. So if something is throwing that off a bit, I'm going to say something, and you can also say something. And that alone, because something will always come up. I mean, no group is perfect. I'm not a perfect player. There's always something where somebody could say, whenever Sarah comes up with an idea, Bob, you immediately roll dice on it. Mm-hmm. But Sarah called it, so let Sarah do the first roll.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and we've all had, I don't know, we've all, but experienced DMs who've DM'd for a lot of different players and a lot of different situations, have seen all sorts of behavior that isn't even meant to be rude or off-putting by the people. It's how they are. And so they just need to be told exactly what Teos said, in the least, conflict-oriented way possible.
Right.
So
you've got a good note here that when you're communicating, all of this is about communication ahead of the first session, right? And your last point here is to tell people, what will this first time we get together be? Is it what we would call a session 0? Is it character creation? Is it play? Like, that's a really important thing, both to think through yourself and tell your players so they know what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they may be just as nervous as you are about sitting down at a table and becoming another character and telling a story and being part of this group. So the more you can reassure them and give them what's going to happen, the better off everyone is. So when you get to your first session, you can handle any of the communication that we just talked about that was not done before the session. The more you can do before the session, obviously better. But if you do need to set expectations, if you do need to deal with food, if you do need to handle safety tools, do it then. There is scads of advice out there available, including on previous episodes of this show, that talk about the importance and the contents of a session 0.
Yeah, we've even seen some material in books like Van Richten's, which we just reviewed, right? It addressed session 0s as well. So there's some useful information there, especially around horror games, but just in general.
Yep. So we don't want to do a whole episode on just session 0. Some of the stuff that we talked about is already included in that, but you can read up about that and be ready if you do a full session 0, what that entails. Now, in terms of the content that you're going to run at your first session, this question always comes up, and I know we've discussed it before, but we need to discuss it again. Mm-hmm. If you're teaching new players, and if you're new yourself as a DM, do you use pre-generated characters, or do you take the time to create new characters from scratch with your players? There is no wrong answer in general, but there are wrong answers depending on your style, the player's needs, and so on. So let's discuss that. Do you want to start, or do you want me to?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So most of the time, I prefer to teach new players with pre-generated characters. Because the game that they generally watch, if they're watching streams, is not character creation, it's play. And that's what they want to do. The fun of the game for a majority, if not a high majority of the people, is the play, not the character creation. There is a place for character creation, however. So what I prefer to do is run a quick session with pre-generated characters, which teaches people the rules, gets them into the stories without focusing on the bits of rule knowledge that are helpful but not necessary to play the game. It also helps then if after a session or 2 or 3, they do want to create their own characters, they now have a frame of reference for what characters can do, because they've watched the Paladin pre-gen do his thing. They watched the Rogue do her thing. They've seen it all happen, and they can say, oh, that was cool when the wizard cast that spell, so I want to play that. They then have some knowledge from which to build a character, which then you don't have to explain in grim and grisly detail, which can put certain players off if they have to sit and listen to this explanation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find that walking players through character creation is hard. Like, we could do a show on that alone, because it's really hard to keep everybody on the same page. One is, you usually don't have a book for every single player. And so just that process of trying to keep everybody moving forward and not to end up with one player that's done, especially when you have spellcasting classes, and another player who needs another 40 minutes to get done. It's sort of a mess of a process, and I've never felt super great about it. Probably the closest I've come to that is an all D&D Beyond character creation or other online tool where you're just making your character online, and you can literally, everybody can be on a device and go screen by screen, and then you make it through. But even then, it is just hard. And spellcasting particularly, because all classes have meaty amounts of spellcasting in 5th edition, there's no quick process to looking through all of the cantrip possibilities and all of the spells. So yeah, I tend to be on your side of things, where I think it's better to somehow play first with the pre-gen and then give them a reason why they can swap out who they're playing. And that can be that very quickly on in the story, you reach a town, and in the town there are other adventurers as well. So then they can decide, do I just want to customize my character, or do I want to just dump it and be something else?
Yep. Yeah. And if you do go the character creation route, try to limit the choices that they have to make. Taking that survey today, it said, which race do you prefer to play? And the list of races that you could play was like 4 columns. Yeah. And having that sort of choice to make right at the start, if you're new, you can't even say, dwarves are short and good with axes, and elves are light and good with magic. You can't do that for 27 different races and then try to explain it all. So if you do go the character creation route, try to limit those choices. Use the basic rules to start with.
Yeah, and that's exceedingly hard in D&D Beyond. Like, just even trying to get folks from middle school game to remember to turn off things like Eberron and Unearthed Arcana and, Magic the Gathering and all that. It was so hard. And people showed up with, I have the mark of blah, blah, blah for my character. I'm like, okay. Yeah. I'm just going to ignore that. Fine. Right. Exactly. But it's really hard. And it also, it has that problem where you often want an iconic D&D experience, and you might end up with, a Yuan-Ti and a Gnoll and a Goblin show up at, as the party of characters. And that might not be it might be fun, but it might not be iconic. So pre-gens let you get past all those problems, and then later you can handle real character creation.
Mm-hmm. And if you do go the pre-gen route, try to tie them to the adventure that you're playing in some way. It doesn't have to be, super tightly meshed with the story of the adventure. You don't need to be relatives of the key players in the town, say. But having a backstory or flaws or traits that tie into the adventure gives new players a line that they can follow if they get lost. and they can always look at their character sheet and say, oh, wait, I'm a folk hero from this town. Mm-hmm. People know who I am. So instead of me having to navigate these social encounters, I can just walk into the tavern and people will talk to me. And I can play up on that part of my background.
Yeah, and the original box set, what was funny is sort of those pre-gens were for that first box set. But then what was hilarious with those pre-gens would show up in all kinds of other play with these ideals and bonds and flaws that were tied to things that didn't exist because they were from the starter set. It was so funny to see, like, great, that's going to be helpful.
Yeah, that is one of the pitfalls of using pre-gens from a different set. You want to talk about collaboratively defining the world, which is a great thing.
So this is something that I love to do, and folks who know me know I've created a free product for this that you can get off my website if you join the mailing list. And I talked about it on the Dragon Talk podcast because it's something that really blew my mind when I used it with the RPG Dresden Files. And it's the idea that you give the players a stake in defining the world to some extent. And so you can check that out for a real in-depth analysis of it. But in general, this first session is something where you can ask your players, to the degree that you want to, for input on the game. The reason to do that is because the more that players are involved, they're going to remember those things they all together said, and they will really know your world. So if you think of a very classic D&D experience a lot of us had, is we'd show up at someone's house and they would have a binder of stuff of their world, and we knew none of it. They were super excited about it, and they'd talk about it, and it would all go over our heads, and we'd just have to play to figure it out, and we would never get through that whole binder. Mm-hmm. Contrast that with if we were to sit around right now and say, tell me something about the jungle, right? How do the villages that border this jungle, how easy is it for them to move from one village to another? And if you just answered a few questions like that, that reality that you help define is going to get cemented in our brains. It's very dangerous because of the wild beasts. All right, we got a wild beast problem. The terrain is constantly shifting. Ooh, that could be magical, or maybe it's just that it grows quickly. But we start defining things, and you're going to remember those things you said on this very first session of play for a really long time. And so thinking about some aspect of this, and it can even be with a published campaign. On Dragon Talk, we used example of Rime of the Frost Maiden when we talked about this subject. You can just say things like, here are the 10 towns. Which of these sound most interesting to you? And the top 3 are going to be involved. But by virtue of that discussion, everybody's going to remember the 10 towns a little better, right? So this kind of thing is something I'm really big fan of. I also use this when I ran the Tomb of Annihilation campaign for a home game group. I asked them things like, do you want it to be hard to move around the world? Like, do you want to work on survival? Tracking your supplies, dealing with whether you have clean water. And they were like, no, we don't. So it's like, great. We're just not going to worry about that. Like, you don't want that, so I'm not going to lean into that at all. You might get lost, but we're not going to track days of water or food or anything like that. We're going to move around the map and focus on the places we get to. And then it was things like, do you want, like lots of tombs? Do you want like deep Indiana Jones experience? And they're like, yes, we do. Like, all right, great. I'm going to add extra tombs to this and make for more of that. And so just some questions that help you know what players want out of the campaign helps you know where to spend time. Mm-hmm. And if you think of a product like Tomb of Annihilation, where you have lots of different things on the map that you may or may not do, Rime with all those locations you may or may not use, that all really helps you understand how much time to spend in one place or another. Yeah. Descent into Avernus, right? Is this all about Baldur's Gate or all about Avernus? And understanding what your players like helps you run it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 points on that real quick. The Fate games I've played, the character creation was the most fun part of the game. It's almost the opposite of D&D, right? D&D is like, okay, get through character creation so you can play. With Fate, it was like, oh, we had so much fun creating our characters together and setting them in the world and creating the parts of the world that we were allowed to create. It's like, I want to do that again.
Yeah. I can still tell people exactly the Dresden Files setting we all created collaboratively. Like, that's how much it stuck in my brain. I can't forget it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so it's what's the tavern owner's name again? We created this tavern owner. This is what we did at Will Doyle's behest for the first adventure in the Oracle of War campaign, where the group gets to create this contact that they all have a connection to in one way or another. And so they create the person, this NPC, who plays an important role in the whole campaign, and everyone gets to choose one connection they have to that person, that NPC. And so you remember that NPC then because you helped create that NPC.
Yeah, it's great.
So you play out your first session. What we've skipped over here is what to run, because we're going to talk about that later. So at the end of your first session, generally maybe 24 hours later, send out a communication recapping the session. You can talk right at the end of the session, get everyone's feedback, their instant feedback. But a lot of times the instant feedback is still informed by sort of the adrenaline from playing.
Yeah. And some people usually have to go. Like, a lot of times, the older your players are, the more that they've got to get home. And so, like, you play to the last second, everybody's like, that was so great, thanks, bye.
Yep. Yeah, as you run out the door for your, in my case, hour drive home at midnight. But, so let 24 hours pass and then communicate as you did before, recapping the session from your eyes, and then getting feedback on everyone from how it went. And you can do it as a group, but it also helps to individually talk to everyone, because they may have something that they're not willing to say to the group that they will say to you. It was great. I didn't like how, Fred kept talking over me. So is that something we can address? Yes, we will address it next time. And then continue that discussion of what the players want. Now they have some experience in what this game is like. They have more information on which to make their decisions on what they liked and what they didn't. So you can gather that information on how to move forward with the next session.
Yeah, and I have a kind of brain where I really need to write things down, or they don't quite exist. And the act of writing down really reinforces in my brain what it is, and now I can tell it like a story. And that's almost what I need. Is I need to be able to verbally say it, but I can't verbally say it until I write it down. So really important for me is, if not that day that I've run, but really the next day, I must write down notes. And I usually do a 1-page synopsis of what happened. And I share that with the players. And by doing that, I hold myself accountable to getting it done, which is part of the way my brain works as well. So I write up my notes of what we did, and I send it to them. And I do things like I underline or bold every proper noun, right? So names of places, the names of NPCs. That way it makes it easy to scan the page and find it. And then I actually I'll print it out. I'm not a printer much, but I do print these out, and I 3-hole punch them, and I put them in a binder. And I have that at the table. So I can easily go through and go, oh yeah, it was session 12 where you met this person. Because I find that when I do that, I can go back to it more easily. Mm-hmm. And I can make that illusion of a rich world come true more easily, because I have these notes established, and I'm not just leaving it behind, but I'm remembering it, and I'm able to communicate it. And also for the players, they often forget this. It also becomes great material for the 1 or 2 players you might have who really love to know the lore of the world and who like to keep track of this stuff. They will use that to then fuel their tracking of all this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the final thing, really, it's not game related per se, but just socially related, is how do you think it went? In terms of, maybe you invited a disparate group of friends. You have a friend from work and a friend from somewhere else, and they're all getting together. How did they mesh? Is it, even though D&D is a social game, it doesn't fix social ills that would be there if you were going to a concert or having a meal or, playing tennis or something. If there is a conflict, a personality conflict that just isn't going to resolve itself, the game is a good social lubricant in terms of getting together and people being able to, but it's not a panacea. You can't.
Right.
So if there is a problem, shut it down right away. Don't drag it out, because it probably won't get better if it was really standing out as a problem.
Yeah.
From the start. Yeah.
That's a good point. That's probably something I should think on more, because sometimes I have done that where there have been players in my games that weren't super great, and it took a while for everybody to sort of admit that this particular person, or sometimes it's two people, like, are not super gelling. We have different styles, and it's better to kind of address that up front.
Yeah,
and it's okay to switch players, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, what else anything else we want to talk about at this time, Sean?
Yeah, I can't think of anything else in terms of just this sort of introduction to this topic. I think next time we should dig into what you should run, and then we can look at some of the suggestions that were given when I asked on Twitter. If I'm a new DM, what do you suggest I should run? Mm-hmm. You can talk about some of the things that people suggested and look at them up close. Look at some of the problems with them, as well as what they're good at in terms of teaching the game or helping a new DM run a game for the first time.
Excellent.
Sounds good. So with that, I would like to thank all of our listeners. We could not do this without you, because without your ears, these sounds we were making would not be heard. And thank you to our patrons. If you would like to become a patron of the show, you can go to patreon.com/MMP. So, Teos, you do some stuff on social media, I've heard. Where can people find that good stuff?
My blog is alphastream.org. This week, what am I talking about? I spent all this time yesterday drafting it, and now I can't even remember what it is. But I've got something coming out this week that I remember being very excited about, and my brain has vacuumed it out. It's the kind of weekend it's been. I worked on like 9 things this week. Mm-hmm. But yeah, alphastream.org. You can get that free guide to collaborative world design that we talked about. And you can find me on Twitter at alphastream. What about you, Sean?
You can find me on Twitter at Sean Merwin, or you can go to the forums at forums.misdirectedmark.com. If you want to follow the podcast's Twitter, it's at MasteringDND. Mastering Dungeons is a Misdirected Mark production. So, Teos, being a new DM and all, what should we do now?
We are going to talk to our players about the types of monsters that they'd like to kill, and then delve into that during our session 0.
Or also with your therapist.
That's a great idea.
That's what I thought.